He took a flashlight to her wall and he found faint water damage, just the slightest amount that you could see. Well, we removed the wall and it was full of Stachybotrys. And we learned that that was just the tip of the iceberg because the entire house had not been flashed properly. So it was everywhere. It's kind of like the roofer and the builder lit the match, but then the HVAC company just poured gasoline on it and made it a really toxic house over time. There are real scientists, there are real studies from 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024. There are peer-reviewed studies that show how dangerous toxic mold is. It's the brain damage, I think, that's hardest to resolve. That's what really lingers. We must be talking about clean air because we spend so much of our time indoors. We have to have clean indoor air or we're going to have a sick, very sick country.
Kristina, you have a powerful story to share, and I want to take things all the way back to the beginning. You were sick for a couple of years, had no idea what was going on. How far back is this, and what are the first symptoms you're experiencing?
I was poisoned in a beautiful house I was living in. I owned the house. It was a beautiful house and we were still really sick and I couldn't figure out what was going on or why, and ultimately found out that it was our house. The first symptoms were these migraines that wouldn't go away. I'd never had migraines in my whole life. I couldn't figure out where they were coming from. And I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. So besides the migraines, I would wake up in the morning and feel like I'd been hit by a truck. I couldn't wake up. I wanted to go to bed at 5:30 in the afternoon. Something was very wrong. And the doctors thought that it was stress.
And how quickly did the symptoms come on? Was this something over that period of time of a couple of years that it got worse and worse? Or when it came on, did it just hit you right away?
It came on slowly over time. Starting in 2017, I was getting these migraines and I was feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. And I look back at my medical records and I can see at that time, I'm telling my doctors, something's wrong. I feel fuzzy. I can't see straight. But then I also started having some psychiatric symptoms, like maybe I want to drive into oncoming traffic, things that I'd never thought before. I was doing high-level IP litigation at a big firm. I was managing huge patent cases. And in a way, I was at the top of my game, but I started to feel confused. And the doctors said, reduce stress in your life. And so I did that. I took a government job. I had every other Friday off. And I went gluten-free and sugar-free and dairy-free. And I exercised more and I slept well. And I got worse. So where it really hit the fan was when they sent us to quarantine at home for COVID and work from home. And suddenly I really couldn't function. And finally, I had a doctor who gave me a mycotoxin test. And she was doing a whole range of tests. She was trying to figure out what was wrong with me, right? Was it Lyme disease? Was it a parasite from when I lived in Africa? I mean, what was the root cause? And this was one of many tests that she gave me. And my scores were through the roof. And she said, go test your house.
Wow. So you mentioned how extreme the results were of this test on your body. What specifically did they find?
It was called a mycotoxin test. And the particular mycotoxin that was really high was called ochratoxin A. And of course, now I'm well versed in that, but I had never heard of a mycotoxin. My husband and I have 5 Ivy League degrees between us. We had never heard of toxic mold. Never heard of Stachybotrys or Aspergillus or ochratoxin A or any of these terms I'm so familiar with now. We just had no idea. And we can get to that, but that's absolutely intentional by industry. And, I was just trying to figure it out as I went along. So ochratoxin A, I learned, is correlated with a mold called Aspergillus. And that's the mold that was found in our house in extreme levels, along with Stachybotrys.
Okay, you mentioned the fact that when you got the results, you were told to get the home tested. I would assume, given the results, part of what you were instructed to do was take care of your body as well. How did you allocate your time and resources between those two when you found out there was an issue here?
Well, at first, you're just trying to figure out what's going on. So a mold inspector came to our house and sat on our couch, and he said, "Tell me about your family." His name's Tim Taylor, and he's a hero. And I said, "Let me tell you about my daughter." And my daughter had become really violent overnight. And I thought, as soon as I started reading about mycotoxins, I thought maybe this is what's happening with her. So he took a flashlight to her wall and he found faint water damage, just the slightest amount that you could see. Well, we removed the wall and it was full of Stachybotrys. So we're trying to just figure out what's going on. And of course, your immediate reaction is, well, we can fix this. We can fix this. We remove the wall. We hire a certified mold remediator. They're going to come in and they're going to take care of her wall. But there was a mama gut instinct that thought, if it's here, where else is it? And I had a construction expert come and tell me where the mold was coming from, which was the chimney had not been flashed. So water had been coming into her wall for 8 years. And because these homes are made of spray foam, we couldn't see the water damage. So I thought, I think it might be somewhere else. And we learned that that was just the tip of the iceberg because the entire house had not been flashed properly. So it was everywhere. It was in the walls. So how do you allocate your time? I think the first thing you do is you put on your own oxygen mask. And I was so sick that I had to really learn that I couldn't take care of my family unless I took care of myself first. And man, that's a hard lesson to learn.
I want to get into some of the specifics, but I want to highlight a key point in this story that is important because there was another inspector in the house who checked for mold and said you were all clear before this other Tim Taylor came in. And why I think that's so important is because if people are stuck in this mystery of illness trying to figure it out and they get one person saying that their house is clear, it might be worth getting a second opinion.
I'm so thankful because I had actually canceled Tim Taylor because the first guy came in and said, it looks great. And I mean, I don't even know if he did any tests, but he looks around the house. He does a walkthrough. He says, well, this looks like great construction. I'm not worried about you. It must be, mycotoxins are real. It must be from your work. And I really thought, oh, okay, great. Well, I'm glad my house is safe. But see, because I'm an overachiever, I had booked a couple different people and I just was trying to figure out who the first person who could come was. And I had canceled then this second guy because my home was safe. But thankfully, he didn't get my message. And by the grace of God, he showed up at my house that one day. And I thought, he's here. He's clearly booked his time. I feel bad canceling on the spot. I'll just let him come in. And I was in my pajamas. And he was like, can we sit on the couch? And I'm just thinking, this is just the Twilight Zone. I mean, he's a mold inspector. It's like pest control comes to your house and wants to sit down and chat with you, But I did. And he asked the right questions. And he said, I often find it behind the wall of the kid most affected. And he was right.
Given you had these two totally different experiences with mold inspectors, what would you say to somebody right now who is getting an inspection done, what to look for in an inspector to make sure they're getting a thorough job?
Well, you have to get an inspector who cares about health. That's the most important thing. If you wonder how to get a mold inspector, email me at recover@well.law, and we will send you our resources and we'll send you the link to how you can find a qualified inspector, because you need to find an inspector who cares about health. If they don't care about health, they're going to come in and be like, looks good. Or they're going to take an air sample in the middle of the room. That's what mold inspectors do. They take an air sample in the middle of the room. They say it looks great. And then, later on, I get those guys at deposition and I say, where's mold usually found? Well, it's found near the walls, in the walls. Well, how does a mold test in the middle of the room identify mold in the walls? I mean, it makes no sense, right? But the mold inspector industry is dominated by the bad guys, right? the landlords, the construction, the bad guys who don't want you to know that there's mold in your house. So they employ these guys day in and day out to come in and be like, take an air sample in the middle of the room and be like, you're good.
If you're enjoying this episode, let me know by clicking like and subscribe below. Thank you so much, and now back to the show. So is it the fact that they're just being negligent, or talk more about what's going on there? Because obviously this is what an inspector does. He's getting paid to do the work. Why would they just want to push off jobs like that?
Because the repeat players in the space are the big companies that are going to hire them again and again and again. So the residential, big multifamily apartment complex is going to hire this guy over and over again. And or the real estate agents, right, are going to hire the same guys over and over again. So their job is to come and to clear the house. That's their incentive, is to come and clear the house. So they'll come and take a quick look around and take a sample in the middle of the room. And do I want to say they're negligent? Yeah, I think they're negligent. I think they're negligent and they're biased. And you want to find the ones who are not. And there are wonderful, wonderful inspectors out there who care about you, and they're going to want to make sure you're safe. And Tim Taylor saved our life. I mean, he truly saved my life. I would have died in that house. And I have wrongful death house cases. I have a client who died in the house I told her to leave. It will kill you. And the good inspectors are going to keep you safe.
All right, coming back to the story here with Tim. He comes into the house. Your daughter is most affected, so he tears down that wall, finds the mold. What do you guys do next?
I hired the construction expert to come in, who told me that this is probably not an isolated place. Tim did another test that was for endotoxins, which is a different kind of toxin, and that came back high. And you experience so much brain fog when you're in a house like that. It's very hard for you to comprehend that your house is making you sick. I will never forget talking to a friend and saying, I don't feel good and I don't know what to do. And I've got 4 kids and they don't feel good. And, she said, don't you think you should get out of the house? And that was just such a foreign concept to me at the time. It's the middle of COVID. 2 of my kids have neurological problems, right? They're really out of control. My daughter was violent, but my 2-year-old was running into walls. He had bruises all over his forehead. He had regressed in his developmental milestones. I had therapists coming to the house to see him every single day. I can't just show up at a friend's house with 4 kids, right? That just was outside the realm of possibility for me. And she said, go to my house. And she gave me keys to a house that was 30 minutes away. And I had to look at my husband and say, I'm going to take the kids. And basically you can come or not. I mean, it was, that's how dire it was. I'm going to take the kids and you can come or not. And thankfully he came, but he thought I was a lunatic.
So he wasn't affected by the mold?
Well, he was, but he didn't recognize it then. I think he recognizes it now. But there's brain fog, right? And we've never heard of this thing called Stachybotrys. And in his view, it was in Maddie's room. And we were going to fix Maddie's wall and it was going to be fine, right? And Maddie's room was all blocked off. So our house was safe because it was blocked off. And I just knew it was not safe. And I knew I had to get out of there. And I knew I had to get my kids away. And I took, a stuffed animal and a baby blanket for each kid. And I washed it in special materials across the street. And then I picked my big kids up at a birthday party. And I told them, we're going to leave for a little while we fix our house. And I didn't know that we were never going to be able to move back in.
And the way I understand it, you went to this other house, which you were lucky enough to have a friend with a house you guys could stay in, but you had issues there as well.
So I didn't have issues there, but then we moved to another rental where we did have issues because you become hypersensitized. There's actually a lot of literature on this. And the literature is animal studies with mice who encountered Stachybotrys, and they got a slow building cytokine storm of inflammation. And that happened over time. But when they encountered Stachybotrys a second time, the cytokine storm happened immediately. So now we have a family that is hypersensitive, where if we walk in, we can have a reaction. If it's really bad, or if we go to a place that's moderately bad, we're going to have a reaction over time. So we lived in 2 rental properties that we determined were not safe for us. And finally, we're in a third that I do believe to be safe. But this is what happens when you've been exposed to toxic mold. It's impossible to find a safe place to live. You lose the concept of home. You lose the concept of home. And our kids lost their childhood home. So you're trying to balance the trauma of losing your home, losing your Lego kingdoms, with the need to get people healthy, right? You can't just move from place to place. You've got to find them stability. But at the same time, you know that the most important thing you can do to them is to get them to a safe house. So it's a journey, and I'm on that journey, but so many others are. Millions of people are on that journey, and I'm here for it.
Let's talk about the process of when you realize your body's been taken over by this mold or mold toxin. What does that look like to clean that up?
Well, the first thing you do is you get out of the toxic environment. And I want your listeners to hear this. If you are in a toxic environment, the most important thing you can do is get out. And I'm not saying that flippantly. I understand how hard it is to comprehend that your home is hurting you in some way. But if your home is hurting you, you must get out. So that's the most important thing you can do. Get out of the contamination. And by the way, that's true if it's water contamination too. If your water is not safe, get out of that house. But I can't afford it, Kristina. I can't afford it. I can't afford to leave. The answer is you can't afford to stay. You can't afford to stay. Leave and sleep in a tent. And I've had clients who have done that. I mean, I have a client who lived in Hawaii and literally just left his house and slept in his backyard because that's what was safer. So you gotta find a safe house, and that's what we were able to do.
Okay, once you get into a safe place, what is it you do? You mentioned ochratoxin A being in your body. What's the protocol to clean that up?
You now have a toxic load probably that's high in other areas too. So just reduce the toxic load by organic food, fresh fruits, right? I mean, juices. You're no more Clorox, right? You remove the toxins in your body, because not only are you more sensitive to molds, but you're more sensitive to chemicals generally. This causes a chemical reaction and for many people, a mast cell activation. So you do that. And then there are different ways to detox. Some people do niacin and sauna. That can be really effective. Other people do hyperbarics. That can be really effective. I have not found a pure answer. And there are going to be mold advocates listening to this, and there are some doctors who are going to say, no, but there's only one way to do it, and it's X. And then there are other doctors who are like, there's only one way to do it, and it's Y. And I don't care if it's X or Y. Find a mold literate doctor who will listen to you and guide you and find something that works for you. And it might take some trial and error. And we're still in trial and error for me and the 2 of the 4 kids, because it causes brain damage. And how do you fix that? It's really hard to fix that.
You named a bunch of different modalities and clean food as being options to detox. What specifically did you and your two kids do? And where are you at along the continuum now? Have you been tested to see that your toxin levels are coming down?
So toxin levels have come down. We 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 were already pretty clean eaters, but we went, mostly organic. At one point, I took the family up to, because when we evacuated the first rental house, I took the kids up to Cooperstown, New York with me, and did things like walk barefoot, right? Lots of time in the sun, lots of time outside, everything that I could do to kind of get fresh, basically fresh air, just get out into fresh air. Detox baths, like lots of different supplements that we took at that time, a lot of juices that I was making, fresh juices every day, a lot of smoothies, everything that I could do to eat clean and eat whole foods. Like if it's a plant, you can eat it. If it eats plants, you can eat it. But if it's made in a plant, don't eat it. That's kind of what we followed. And we try to do that as much as we can. And then I've done hyperbarics. I've done hyperbarics with my son, Scott. My daughter has done it too. The three of us have done it to try to heal the brain inflammation, because for kids, this is a neurological response to a pathogen. That's called PANS. For all three of us, but especially my two kids, they had a sudden neurological change during COVID when we were quarantining at home. It was a sudden regression in milestones. It was a sudden violent tendency all of a sudden, or aggression all of a sudden that had not been there before. And anxiety, extreme anxiety for me and for my daughter. So we're going to be dealing with the brain inflammation for a long time. We went to the Amen clinic, and you can actually see in our brains where the brain inflammation is. And for my son, Scott, he had an entire ring of fire. And we actually ultimately, we can get to talking about the case, but we presented this to the jury and they got to see, the ring of fire in my kids' brains. So it's the brain damage, I think, that's hardest to resolve. That's what really lingers.
So you have two kids that are affected. Are the other two symptom free?
The other two were affected, but I think that they're fine now. They're out of the environment. They're good. They're fine.
And what do you think the difference was? Just the proximity to the mold, or the difference in genetics?
I think difference in genetics, but I also think proximity to the mold. The wall of Stachybotrys was right behind my daughter's wall, and she was coloring during COVID, hours at a time, just in there coloring on her floor. Just a couple of feet from Stachybotrys, which is used in biological warfare as a neurotoxin. So she's sitting there in her room with a neurotoxin. So that's really upsetting to think about. And when I did the construction report, I learned that the same defect that was at her corner of the chimney by her wall was at the corner where my son Scott slept. So the exact same condition was there too. So I don't know if that's it. I'm sure genetics play a role, but it's pretty clear.
Let's get into the total involvement of the house. The way I understand it, you mentioned the chimney, the HVAC system was affected. Talk about, as time went on and people got in there inspecting and cleaning things up, or at least attempting to in the beginning, what was found with the mold and the flaws in the home.
Well, we started to rebuild the house, and we thought we were doing something pretty comprehensive, which is removing the bricks from the outside so we could see if there was water damage anywhere else, because the spray foam hides water damage from the inside. So let's work on the outside. And I will never forget when they came across the water damage and mold growing this thick. outside of the kitchen, which is where we ate every day. And when you came to the inside of the house and then you opened that up, it was just thick black mold. And that particular mold was called chytomium, which is another kind of black mold. It's very dangerous and also a neurotoxin. And I just felt so sick to my stomach looking at it. That's where my kids were eating. And then in their bathtub, the builder had not had basically attached the tile to just particle board. So that had become toxic behind there too. And all of that was problematic. We then learned that the home had only been flashed in 2 places. And in those 2 places, it was flashed incorrectly. The roofer had told the builder. The roofer said, there's something wrong here. I wasn't able to flash the chimney because the mason and I weren't there at the same time. So you need to have the chimney rebuilt so I can flash it. And the foreman said, no, it's okay. Just rig it. Make it look like it can pass inspection. So this was intentional, right? But one of the inspectors who came, and his name was Stuart Nolly, he looked at the wall, and at my daughter's wall in particular, and he said, this isn't just a water damage problem. This isn't just a leak. This appears to me to be a humidity problem because it shouldn't look like this. And what I learned was if you have a spray foam house, you need to have extra dehumidification to make sure it doesn't become a humid bubble because the humidity can grow into the spray foam. So, and that's especially true, of course, if you have leaks, right? Because if leaks are coming in and it's not drying out, then it's growing mold into the walls, which is what happened here. So the HVAC company, we learned, had not connected the dehumidification feature when they installed it. And they had come back to service it a couple times, but they hadn't identified or solved the problem. So the HVAC company, exacerbated it and just added fuel to the fire. It's kind of like the roofer and the builder lit the match, but then the HVAC company just poured gasoline on it and made it a really toxic house over time. So it took $700,000 to fix it. And by that time, we'd spent all of our money because, of course, the builder and the roofer, these are insurance companies, okay? The defendants they're represented by insurance companies who bill by the hour. So I really thought, well, and at the time I was a personal injury defense lawyer. So I really thought that if I laid it all out, this was really compelling. The liability was really clear. They didn't flash the house. The chimney wasn't flashed. There's a whole wall of black stuff. This is not hard, right? I thought that I would lay that all out and they would, make it right. And I didn't think I was going to have to even bring a lawsuit because I thought this is just an open and shut case. And man, was I wrong. Man, was I wrong. And so, of course, because they didn't make it right, we had to fix the house with our own dollars. I had already left my big firm job and gone to the government. I was already shorter on cash, right? And then you're also dealing with really sick kids. I say no matter how much money you have, you lose it. You could have a lot of money, you lose it all. You could have a medium amount of money, you lose it. Little amount of money, you lose it. Because you spend every dollar you have trying to get well and trying to get your family well and trying to live in a safe place. So by the time it was fixed, we couldn't afford it. And we had to just sell it so that we could pay off all of the debt that we'd incurred in the meantime.
Got it. So in the end, the house was fixed and livable, but you guys couldn't afford it.
Mm-hmm. We were so broke that my father-in-law took out a mortgage on his house. That's the just incredible generosity of people around us who helped us through that season. But we lost.
There are so many layers to the stress you guys must have been going through. It's unimaginable with the health complications, the kids being involved, the house, the finances, involving other family in the finances. You had to switch jobs. Like, it's unimaginable. I can't even picture what that would have been like during that period of time. What is that like for you now on the other side? To a point, you mentioned you're still dealing with the health complications to a point. But what is it like looking back at that time now? And as I talk about all those different elements, and I'm sure there's a lot that I can't even comprehend or that hasn't been shared yet, but what is it like looking back?
Well, I can't talk about the house. My husband wants to build a safe house, and he tried to talk to me the other day about building a home, and I cannot talk about a home without crying. Because it was such a beautiful home. And I remember thinking, I love this house so much. May I never stop loving this house. May I never think that it's too small or not nice enough, because this is my dream house and it's all I ever wanted, was a house just like this. And then we lost that house. And I don't know how to think about home anymore. But I also look back on it and just think I'm filled with gratitude for the people who showed up. And I have a friend who dropped something off for us and saw this guy. I kind of gave her a little tour of the new rental house, and she saw this guy putting together a bed, and she's like, "Who's that guy?" And I was like, "Oh, that's Christopher." "Who's he?" "Friend from church." Christopher just putting together my daughter's bed. And it turns out that we had helped Christopher's family just a couple of years before, and he was so thankful to have the opportunity to help. But I'm just so thankful to the Christophers of the world who showed up for us in that time. I have a friend who gathered business looking clothes because I lost all my clothes. And she went to a few lawyers in town and asked if they had any clothes that I could have. That was really, those were humbling things. And I'm very thankful for the people who were there and who walked us through it.
I can hear and feel the love you had for that home. Were you guys the ones to build it?
We didn't build it. We bought it from the builder. And he had lived in it for a couple of years with his family. And like I said, it was a beautiful home. And he is a really, really nice person. He didn't mean to poison our family. And for that reason, I never say his name out loud or say the company's name out loud, because this was not intentional. But this is also what the system is for and what insurance is for. And his insurance company just really screwed him over, because if you're a builder, you have to be insured for the most catastrophic event that could happen, like a fire, right? And they're insured for that kind of thing, but they're not their insurance companies often claim that they're not insured for toxic mold, which is honestly as bad as a fire, because it overtakes the whole house and you lose everything. So it's a crazy circumstance to be in this house, and you've taken all the precautions. You have insurance, you have really good insurance, and you have good home insurance. I mean, you imagine that if something happens to your house, that's why you have insurance. But then you find out that insurance doesn't cover toxic mold. So it doesn't cover your loss. And not only that, but the builder's insurance says that it doesn't cover mold. I mean, the builder's insurance company brought a lawsuit against me in federal court to say that their insurance policy didn't apply. I mean, it's the lunacy of it knows no bounds. It's so upsetting.
Now, given what you know and the experience you and your family have had, what could you share to help other families out before they get to the point you guys got where symptoms were severe? You're talking about these different issues in the home with the humidifier and the chimney, but like for somebody who's just living in a home right now and wants to get on top of this before it becomes a chronic health issue, what would you say to them?
Get it tested. And again, not tested by one of those inspectors who's just going to come and say it's fine. Truly get it tested. Spend, $1,500 or so for a good inspection. An inspector who knows about health issues, who comes in and truly looks for water damage and looks for any source of humidity. Have someone, if you opened our HVAC plenum, it was full of mold. I never knew to look in a plenum. So have an HVAC company come and look in your plenum, and just look through your system and make sure that your home is clear. But also you can get an EBV filter so that your home is, has clean air. But we must be talking about clean air because we spend so much of our time indoors. We have to have clean indoor air or we're going to have a sick, very sick country.
As you say, gonna have a sick country, it gets me thinking about you shared before millions of people are affected by this. And I don't want to misquote you. I'll have you share that stat again. And then how do we know that with the way that mold comes in so silently at first? How is that number predicted and determined?
Well, the numbers are predicted according to the houses that are estimated to be sick buildings. And sick buildings are defined as buildings that have water damage that have not been appropriately addressed. So water damage festers and it creates mold, mycotoxins, but also dust mites and then VOCs. And there's a combination of the VOC. And I'm not an expert. So take all this from a layperson, but it creates a toxic soup from a sick building. And we knew all this, by the way. We knew this in the 2000s. And industry did a really good job of basically shutting up science and funding studies that, they acted like the tobacco industry, right? They literally had studies that showed that mold is ubiquitous and it's everywhere. It does not cause health problems. Well, that has all now been debunked. There are real scientists, there are real studies from 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024. There are peer-reviewed studies that show how dangerous toxic mold is. But because industry silenced science on this issue for so long, the builders didn't care when they built these homes. And nobody knows about it. So we have to tell people about it. We have to have people, testing their homes. And then we have to hold the builders accountable so that they stop poisoning our families. And, not just builders, but also the multifamily industry and leasing and all of it.
When along your journey did you guys decide to take legal action, and what did that look like?
Well, like I said, I didn't think I needed legal action. I mean, I just thought that if I laid it out in a letter, and I did reach out to a lawyer because I'm a lawyer, right? And so I thought if we lay it out in a letter, like they'll compensate us for just to fix our house, right? And they didn't do that. And they claimed that their insurance policies didn't apply, and they I don't mean I actually don't even blame the roofer or the builder. This is what they have insurance for, right? Although the roofer, the intentional conduct is bad, but this is what they have insurance for. So we just had to take legal action because we literally lost it all. There's nothing else that we could do. But I will say that the reason I stuck with it was because I learned about so many other families who maybe couldn't afford the lawyer. And not that we could afford the lawyer. I mean, I had to borrow money for the lawyer, right? But it's like we had to, because we had to hold them accountable. We had to say it out loud, and we had to get our money back. And that's why we brought a case.
Talk about the process of how that unfolded.
We sent them a letter. I don't even remember if they responded or they just said, go pound sand. I mean, you know what? I do know. They wrote a letter back and they said, no problem. We'll fix Maddie's room. Like 10 grand or something like that. And it was very clear that they did not understand the magnitude of this problem. So we filed a case in Travis County, and they made my life living hell. And, they hired an expert to say that I had a somatic disorder, which is obviously not true. The deposition of me was 10 hours long. They were just as bad as they come, kind of. And we just powered through and kept moving. A judge at our summary judgment hearing looked at me and said, Mr. and Mrs. Baehr, I am so sorry for what happened to your family. You must have thought that you were crazy, and you were not crazy. And I know how dangerous mold is. And I am so sorry this happened. I'm going to have to do some legal stuff, but I just want you to know I'm so sorry. You know what the other side did? They had her disqualified for being empathetic. And what she didn't realize was that their defense was that I was crazy. So she was actually commenting on something substantive. They didn't, she didn't know that. Like, why? I mean, she didn't know that. So they disqualified, one of the judges. But that's the kind of stuff that they pulled day in and day out. And ultimately, we had a jury trial and we won.
Talk about the final verdict.
Well, there's something really special about the justice system working. And this is what the law is for. This is what tort law is for. Tort law is designed to entrust the safety of our country in the juries of our peers, right? If they don't hold the companies responsible for meeting standards of care, then who will? And the tort system is about compensation for the people who've been injured, but it's also about deterrence to make sure that this doesn't happen again. And that's what our case was about. It ultimately was against the HVAC company, and the HVAC is the lungs of the house. The HVAC has to be safe. An HVAC company must provide an HVAC that creates a safe environment, right? If they don't, then it can poison the people who live in the home. And this particular HVAC company knew that because it was all over their website about how dangerous toxic mold is and everything. So that part was easy. But the jury believed us and gave a verdict of $3.8 million. And just to be believed, right, by a jury of your peers was really special. They didn't think I was crazy. And during the trial, when opposing counsel kind of insinuated that maybe I was just upset at the time because it was COVID and I was a working mom, and he kind of like threw the working mom defense at me. And every time the judge, who's also a working mom, obviously, would kind of look at me and like smirk a little bit, because it just doesn't work with American juries. They're not buying it. They want companies that take responsibility. They want companies to say, I'm sorry. And they want companies to make it right. And if you're making excuses for the company that screwed up, you're not going to get very far. And certainly not if you're blaming the victim. Blaming the victim just isn't working in 2024. And it didn't work for them. And what was really interesting was the closing argument when he basically said, Mr. and Mrs. Baehr have so much to be thankful for. And when bad things happen, we should be thankful for what we have. And Mr. and Mrs. Baehr obviously had lots of resources, and they should be thankful. And that really bothered me, because the first thing I said when you asked me about that time is that I am thankful. I'm so thankful. I'm so thankful that we were able to borrow money to hire a lawyer to take the case, right? I'm so thankful that we had resources and friends who stood up, and doctors who helped us, and therapists for my daughter, and the speech therapist who found a special school for my son. And I'm incredibly thankful. But you can also seek justice at the same time. You can be thankful and seek justice. And that is good in the world. And that's what we want in the world. And those comments, I think, only inspired me to go forth and do more for others, because I really believe that families need to stand up and take a stand. Because if we don't stand up and take a stand, who will? We have to protect the families who are coming behind us. And I knew that when I took this case, I knew that I was representing so many families who didn't have a case, couldn't find a lawyer, wouldn't find, I knew that I was representative of so many more. And I carried their mantle all the way through that jury trial and to the verdict.
At the time of your case, was there any other cases similar at the time or before?
So there have been lots of cases that are similar. The biggest case was called the Ballard case, and that was in the 2000s. And she won. Melinda Ballard won an enormous verdict. And it was after that verdict that the insurance companies stopped insuring toxic mold claims. And as a result, that kind of set this whole thing in motion. So lawyers stopped taking these cases. I couldn't find a lawyer to call me back when I wanted to find a contingency lawyer. And thankfully, I found a wonderful lawyer. His name's Kevin Terrazas. He did a phenomenal job, but he worked hourly. And I'm still paying him because now we're appealing it. And he is a wonderful lawyer. I'm so thankful to have him, but he's not a personal injury contingency lawyer. And I couldn't find one. They wouldn't call me back because they don't do these cases anymore. Not after the insurance companies stopped paying for them. And that's why it's so necessary to do it now.
You mentioned the fact this lawyer is still involved. What is he doing specifically?
Well, they're appealing the verdict. So we're going to be up on appeal for a little while. But that's okay. That's part of the process. It's part of the process.
You mentioned the silver lining before, coming back to seeing the people in your life that, took a stand and supported you guys during the tough times. Another part of the silver lining of this whole situation is the fact that you started a new law firm, Just Well Law. So talk about where along the journey that began and how things have unraveled since.
Well, when I was in Cooperstown, New York, that when I evacuated that second time with my family, I was trying to work for DOJ part-time from there. And I was sick, and I was trying to deal with sick kids. And I just thought, this is not working. I'm not doing as good of a job as I want to do. And I thought, there's so many other people who need this kind of help. Maybe I'll just start a law firm and help just one or two other families. And, I'll recover myself, I'll feel better, and then I'll help another couple of families. And, that will be enough income to kind of make up what I would lose if I left DOJ. So that was my plan. We're going to just have a very small little law firm, just me and one paralegal. I hired the paralegal who had worked with me at McCool Smith, who's wonderful. Her name's Pam Durkee, and she's amazing. And I just thought we were going to do a little small firm. And my DOJ friends were supportive and wished me well. And CNBC did a story on my family right then that linked to my brand new website that my 13-year-old had made the week before. I mean, I just released it. You couldn't even find me on Google when it came out, especially because I had a .law address. So anyway, CNBC did this story. It linked to my website, and I had 1,000 calls in 2 weeks. And I've just been catching up ever since because there is such a need for this. And there's so many people who need help, and we want to be there for them.
What have you guys done with the influx of people reaching out? You know, starting out small, I'm not sure exactly where you're at now, but how have you handled that and supported people?
Well, my husband created an Airtable. I'd never heard of Airtable before. You probably know about Airtable, but it, our website went directly into an Airtable. So that's the practical answer. I suddenly had everyone in the spreadsheet, so that helped. But then one of those calls was from Hawaii, and this woman said, "I've been poisoned. Can you help?" And I flew over there. Her name was Jamie Simic. She's an American hero, and she told me that the water was contaminated because the Navy had spilled jet fuel in the water. And I actually knew a little bit about that story because I had just been working with military families and had gone up to Washington, D.C. to do some advocacy there. And I'd heard about what happened at a place called Red Hill. There was an enormous fuel leak, tens of thousands of gallons, and the fuel went directly into the water source. And the government didn't tell people not to use the water, didn't tell people about the leak, let 6,000 people have medical encounters before the government acknowledged that there was fuel in the water. So I go over there and it's a case against government. I was just working for the government. No problem. I can do that. I'll take a couple cases, just one or two. I'll help a couple families. It'll be great. And so I took a couple cases and then I just spoke out. I just spoke truth about what was happening because it was infuriating to me that the Navy was standing up and saying, jet fuel is just in and out of your body in 48 hours. You're going to be fine. Short half-life. I don't know. They were saying all this scientific jumbo that wasn't true. And I went to the source on PubMed and I read jet fuel exposure. There's actually a lot out there. This is Wikipedia, people. And so I held a little town hall and I held up Wikipedia and I said, this is Wikipedia. This is not rocket science. I understand that you're sick and that you're going to get sick. That is fact. And so there were some other lawyers at that time, but I think people liked me because I was out there saying out loud what they wanted to shout from the rooftops, which is the United States government poisoned 93,000 people. And I don't use those terms lightly. They knew that there was fuel in the water and they let people use it. And people got sick. Why? Because they wanted to protect their asset over their people. And they chose their asset over their people. And that's what our case is about. And now I represent 7,500 people against the United States of America in this enormous mass tort. And it's a beautiful case. It's a really important case. And it's historic because there has never been a case that has gotten this far for environmental injury against the United States.
When did the jet fuel accident occur?
November 2021. So that was around the time I started my law firm. So I got the call in December. And I was really horrified by what happened. But I also was really confident that I could help because I know how to bring a case against the United States because I had just been there working on claims under the Federal Tort Claims Act. This was my case. Like this was a case I could do. And it was a toxic exposure and it was against the government. And so sign me up, But because it was a toxic exposure case against the government, no other lawyers wanted to do it. And that's how I ended up, leading the charge.
You mentioned the fact that this case is the government prioritizing money over people. What did they think was going to happen? I mean, now it's being drawn out, and in the end, they're probably going to lose on so many different fronts, time and money and the negative publicity. Did they just assume that this was all going to blow away and nobody would, push them on it?
Yeah, it was a pattern of conduct. It is still a pattern of conduct. By the way, the water there is not safe right now. It is not safe. And the government knows that. More than 60% of those homes currently in 2024 have fuel in them. The government had a meeting last week where the government said that out loud. More than 60% of the homes have TPH. The government won't say that's fuel. They'll say, well, maybe it's some organic compound, some organic thing. I mean, I don't care if it's organic or not. It's TPH. It's not good for you. And it's in 60% of the houses. The EPA and the Navy are recognizing that people on the water line there right now have rashes on their bodies because of their exposure. They say that out loud. And yet the Navy at this meeting said out loud, but it is safe. It remains safe. I just want to assure everyone it remains safe. Rear Admiral Gray, it remains safe. And the room, I mean, you could feel, I wasn't even there, but my husband, my son Cooper and I were literally watching and like eating popcorn, and we felt like we were in the room, because how can you say that? You're in a room with people who have symptoms right now. You are recognizing that the EPA officer themselves saw sheens and rashes. Today, in 2024, if there are sheens and rashes, by definition, it's not safe. And so then there was an EPA lady there who goes, and I really liked her. I don't remember her name, but she goes, we might need to work on our language. We hear you. I mean, what planet are we on? So anyway, this is their MO. This is what they do. They say there's no indication it's not safe because they didn't have a test result. They were waiting for the test results. So there's no indication it's not safe. Never mind that thousands of people are going to the emergency rooms and that people are smelling fuel in the water, and we have hundreds of reports of that, but there's no indication it's not safe.
So where along the case are you right now?
We have trial in April for the first representative families. And the government maintains that there's no long-term harm. And they've just stuck to their guns. It was in and out of their bodies. It was short. They're fine. And, the water's safe. It remains safe. It was always safe, never unsafe. It was always, there was not enough water in the fuel in the water to make people sick. So we're good over here.
So do you feel like this is going to be a long, drawn-out case or a quicker verdict?
The government has accepted liability. So that's really extraordinary. The government has, and again, like I said, this is a historic case. There has never been a case that I know of this scale where the government has said, yes, we were negligent. We were negligent. We caused the spill. But that's not enough, because a true apology involves, how can we fix it? And we won't do it again. A true apology says, I'm sorry this happened. How can we fix it? And won't do it again. And they're doing it right now on that water line. Right now, they're saying the same thing. It remains safe. They know it's not safe, and they're saying it remains safe. That's exactly what happened in November 2021. So I'm glad. It's historic that they acknowledged that they contaminated the water. Thank you. But when are you going to take responsibility for failing to tell people that there was fuel in the water? Or at least that there was a risk of fuel in the water, right? The EPA website is really clear. If there is a risk to health, you must issue a do not use warning. And the government ultimately did issue that warning in May of 2022. It issued the do not use notice it should have issued. It said we should have issued this notice. But even then, it didn't distribute it to all the people. And it's, months late. When you're dealing with toxic substances, you have to have this attitude of better safe than sorry, right? Better safe than sorry. That's why if someone smells smoke in a building, you might ring the fire alarm and have people leave the building, right? Better safe than sorry. We'll make sure it's safe and then we'll let people back in. This was like there were kids in a school smelling smoke, and the firefighters came and said, "It's okay. Shh, stay where you are. No indication it's not safe. No indication it's not safe. You're okay." Because they waited for the smoke to reach the fire alarm. That's what this was like. And it's not okay. And I have 7,000 clients who are rising up to say, we don't want to have this ever happen again. So we're going to put ourselves through the same, BS that happened to me in my own case, right? Same stuff. But these 6 families that are going to trial in April, they're willing to put themselves through the ringer to say, and they're willing to let the government say all the things that they're going to say about them. They're willing to do that because they're doing it not for themselves, but for all the families that come after them. And I'm inspired by them. They're standing up and saying, never again. And we're going to be the ones who stand up to it. So
just like you and your family did.
Yeah. And I think that's why this is such a perfect case for me, because I see myself in them. And from the very beginning, I will never forget having drinks with one of my clients, Mandy Fine. And, she was like, "So tell me about your law firm." And I said, "Well, it's brand new." And she got this big grin on her face. She's like, "I know all about you." And she had not hired me yet. She said, "I know all about you." And she said, "I know your firm's brand new." She said, "But you came here and you brought folders." Because I had that Wikipedia and that research that I did, I put in a folder for them. And she said, you came and you brought folders and you care. And so they hired me, and I've just been, growing the firm along with the case, along with our clients, and at every turn passing them the mic, because this is their story. They are the ones who stood up and said never again, right? They found themselves on social media long before they found me. And I kind of entered into their story that was already going on social media, where they were speaking truth. They were talking to the media. Jamie Simic talked to Hawaii News Now from her hospital bed. And at that time, there was a lot of risk of retaliation, and there was a lot of retaliation. And Jamie Simic and Mandy Fine and some of those early incredible women were willing to stand up, come hell or high water, and say, "You poisoned our families, and this is not okay, and we're going to do something about it because you have to stop, and it has to stop now, and it stops with us." And man, I'm just honored to come alongside them and to be part of it. And the other amazing thing that happened is that they united with the local Hawaiians. So our government left them behind. I want to make that really clear. Our own government left our own people behind. Do you know that we haven't even replaced these people's water heaters? It's been 2 years. They've given their lives for our country. We poisoned them, and then we can't even replace their water heater. And the same admiral is at the helm, Admiral Paparo. He's the same guy who told his team to tell people that there was no fuel in the water, right? That there was no indication it was not safe. That's that guy, and he's still in charge, and he still hasn't replaced people's water heaters. It's so upsetting to me. And it's still, it's still happening, but I'm inspired by our clients who are standing up and saying, never again.
Well, it's just so important you're sharing that story, sharing your story. And Kristina, I just want to thank you so much for coming on and sharing it with the audience here. And I'll link up your website, your social media, everything in the show notes. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Now that you're done with Kristina, you're going to want to stick around here and catch my chat with Michael. He's a world-class expert when it comes to mold. You don't want to miss this. I'll see you over there.
What's really crazy about this is you could have a mold problem and have no idea. If we have mold issues in our home that's impacting our air quality, that's impacting